Hi everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about parallels between Stoner by John Williams and Ishiguro's Remains of the Day. And I'm going to be talking about more specifically why I think these two books would share a similar audience. So if you haven't read one, you might be motivated to pick up the other. Then I'll go into more in-depth thoughts about Remains of the Day, but keep it spoiler-free. So if you haven't read the book, I hope you'll be motivated to pick it up. And before I begin, I want to go ahead and say that the idea of comparing these two books side by side is not my original idea. My friend Jimmy from the Fantasy Network made this comparison last year when he read Remains of the Day. I'm going to talk about different points than he brought up, so I'm going to link his wrap-up where he talks about the book and the Nuttys of 2024 as Remains of the Day won his Nutty Award for Best Fiction Book of last year. So let's go ahead and begin. And to start out, I'm just going to give a quick, concise overview here of what we're dealing with these two books. So with Stoner, we are following a man named William Stoner. It pretty much gives away in the first paragraph of the book that we're following his life as he enters the University of Missouri in the year 1910. And some years later, he ends up getting his PhD from that university. He ends up becoming an instructor at that university all the way up until his death. And then in Remains of the Day, we are following an English butler named Stevens, who is reflecting on his career from just post-World War I and Treaty of Versailles all the way up until the present timeline of the story, which takes place in the year 1956. So going on from there, I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the general themes that I feel that these stories evoked for me. And the first being, what does it mean to lead a meaningful life? This was a question that came up for me when I read Stoner. It's a question that I found important to explore because I think we are given ideas in society about what that means and also what it means in one's profession versus one's personal life. So I feel like that is a question that certainly comes up in Stoner, but it also comes up in Remains of the Day. And additionally, with both stories, I feel the question of regret comes forth. What does it mean to live with regret, especially as we get towards the end of our careers or the ends of our lives? I think it's a very human thing to live with regret, to explore regret when we get to older age and we look back at choices that we can't take back. And how do we meet the pain of those regrets? And so I think both stories have room or space to explore that theme. And the other thing I want to say about both books is that I feel both books explore themes in a subtle and thought-provoking way. I don't feel that the authors of either story hit you over the head with the themes. There are things that naturally came up for me when I was reading the books, but I never felt like I was given a specific answer to those questions either. And I found both books emotional in their theming and also relatable, even though I will never know what it's like to be Stoner, this academic in this time period in America. And I will never know what it's like to be an English butler. I feel both books bring up these powerful themes for me as a reader, powerful questions to look at in human life. From here, I'm going to go into a more specific parallel theme, and that has to do with the sacrifices that one makes in order to achieve a specific societal role. And I think this is portrayed differently in both books. In Stoner, we are observing the character create that identity as he goes to university and he suddenly finds himself falling in love with literature. He ends up pursuing the degree that aligns with his heart, with his passion. He marries the woman he believes will complete his path. And we find out the sacrifices that he makes in these situations in order to fit a certain identity, in order to maintain the status quo or to maintain this professional identity. In Remains of the Day, it's a little bit different because unlike Stoner, the identity of this character, Stevens, this English butler, even though he's reflecting on the early part of his career like Stoner all the way till the end, his identity seems to be firmly fixed from the very beginning. So we don't see that formulate. We just see him in the role of English butler from early in his career all the way up until the end. And it's firmly maintained from beginning to end, which is important to note as you read the story. It plays an important role in this story. The way that he identifies as an English butler and what he's willing to sacrifice in order to maintain that professional persona. Now, I want to go ahead and mention that the narrative styles are different in both books. So in Stoner, it is in third-person narration. And although we're in third person narration, I remember making this remark when I talked about the book after I read it, that I felt as a reader very close to this character. And I think part of that is achieved through the revelations that Stoner has on his journey, the things he starts to become aware of inside of himself, the challenges he encounters along the way. So I think that's done beautifully in the story of Stoner. But in Remains of the Day, we are in Stephen's head. We are in first person narration, and Stevens is quite the unreliable narrator. So you have to see beyond the surface of what he presents. He's very limited in what he wants to present to the reader. And this is another way in which Ishiguro is able to give you just little seeds as you go along to reveal something deeper about this character and what's going on in the story and what we're really dealing with. Even though these two stories have a different narrative approach, both books explore these careers from early adulthood all the way up until the end of life. And this leads to the most significant parallel that I found between the two books. While Stoner takes place in the US and Remains of the Day takes place in England, Stoner begins his career pre-World War I, and then the story continues until post-World War II, until his death in the year 1956. Remains of the Day takes place in a present timeline when Stevens is at the end of his career, and guess what year? 1956. And then from there, he's reviewing his career from just past World War I and Treaty of Versailles all the way up until the present timeline. So I found that the most interesting parallel between the two books. It seems to cover a very similar span of time, and you notice how the historical landscape does play a role in both stories, especially in Remains of the Day, as it affects the role of English butlers in this time in history. And then lastly, both books explore the work-life balance. So specifically, if you're successful in one arena, if you're successful in your professional life, but maybe have ill success in your personal life, is that a successful life? And how do we assess that? So I feel both books explore that. And I think another story worth mentioning here is The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Tolstoy. I think that story also explores the work-life balance and professional life versus personal life. So I just want to go ahead and quickly mention that. And I'll also mention from here that if you want more in-depth thoughts about Stoner, I do have a review here on my channel, so I highly recommend checking that out. But from here, I'm going to go ahead and talk in more depth about Remains of the Day. So as I mentioned, Remains of the Day takes place in the year 1956. Our character Stevens, an English butler, is on a road trip across the English countryside. He is going to meet Miss Kenton. Miss Kenton is the former housekeeper that worked at the estate where Stevens now or continues to work. And in Stevens' mind, this is strictly business. He wants to meet with Miss Kenton to ask her to come back and help him restore order, to come back and be a housekeeper at this estate. And while Stevens is on this road trip, he's reflecting on his past. So we have a present timeline and past timeline. And personally, I found that the story unfolded so smoothly between the past timeline and present timeline. It didn't feel jarring at all. I thought the flashbacks were achieved so seamlessly through the narrative. But we are noticing, as we review the past versus the present, the way that the historical landscape has shifted again, the way that being an English butler in 1956 is different than it was early on in Stevens' career post-World War I. And this is made clear as early as the prologue of the book. Now I want to go ahead and talk about the theme of greatness, because this is a question that Stevens brings up as he's reflecting on his past. He is questioning whether he achieved the status of, quote, great English butler, and what it means to be great as a butler. Now, this question of greatness was so fascinating to me. At the time I was reading the book, I had come across a video online, just by chance, of Timothy Chalamet. He's the actor who played Paul Atreides in the recent Dune adaptation. He's also been Bob Dylan and Willy Wonka. He's played a lot of roles. And he won some award, and during the award ceremony, he said that it meant a lot to him to achieve this award because he wants to be great. And not only does he want to be great in his profession as an actor, he wants to be one of the greats. And he went forth to mention several people who were great, not just in acting, but in their fields, like Michael Jordan and Michael Phelps and Marlon Brando, several other names I found that interesting. It was interesting to explore this idea of wanting to be great in one's profession. I think that is an understandable goal to want to achieve. But then there's also the question of wanting to be one of the greats and the difference between that. And also what greatness means to somebody. What does it mean to achieve a level of greatness? And so for Stevens in this book, he equates greatness with having this aspect of dignity. And to him, dignity equals emotional restraint. He also says that this aspect of dignity and emotional restraint can only be achieved by an English butler. And in addition to that, in order to achieve being a great English butler, one has to have impeccable service, long-term service to a, quote, great English gentleman, i.e. an aristocrat. And in this book, we learn the specific aristocrat that Stevens is loyal to. And that's a whole other thing to explore in the story that I won't get into here, but we learn about, again, the sacrifices he's willing to make in order to achieve that level of greatness, how he maintains that greatness, especially according to his definition of what that means. And this leads to the next theme I want to talk about, which is professionalism as imprisonment. Now, this idea of professionalism as imprisonment in my mind comes up because, according to Stevens, in order to be great and have this dignity, emotional restraint, and loyalty to a great English gentleman, the consequence of that is never to be seen by anyone outside of your own profession. So I'm going to give a couple of quotes to explain what I mean. And let me now posit this. Dignity has to do crucially with a butler's ability not to abandon the professional being he inhabits. The great butlers are great by virtue of their ability to inhabit their professional role and to inhabit it to the utmost. They will not be shaken out by external events, however surprising, alarming, or vexing. In other words, Stevens can never not be a butler. He has to be in his professional suit at all times. And to me, this brings up a question I've long been curious about, which is the line between authenticity and professionalism. Because in some professions, for example, you have to wear a uniform, you have to have certain boundaries, you have to act a certain way, you have to compartmentalize your emotions. I think that that's part of professionalism in a lot of professions. And yet, at what point can you be yourself? And how much do you have to suppress your identity, your true identity, and your true emotions in order to be successful or be professional? And then the other part of that is that sustainable long term? And is there a need? Because I think there's a need. I personally think there's a need to be outside of one's profession now and then, to have a family to come home to and be able to be yourself around. I think that that's normal. That's human. But what happens when you can't have that, when you can't have spaces in your life where you could just be yourself outside of your profession? And I say that while acknowledging that there are going to be times in life for some people where they're going to try to achieve a certain goal that is going to require some imbalance when it comes to that. So for example, athletes during certain seasons, they might have to be very regimented about their diet, their sleep, their workout routine. They might not be able to spend as much time with loved ones or friends as usual. And same with somebody who maybe is going to medical school or going to graduate school. There might be certain periods in life where you have to be a little bit imbalanced, where you maybe can't take off your suit as much as one would like. But the question is sustainability. How long can you do that and it be healthy and sustainable? And it again brings up that question of success in professional life versus personal life. When you get to the end of your life, is society going to remember you more for the person you were or for how you were in your profession? These are interesting questions that one can explore through Stevens' story, especially as he puts being a great English butler above everything. Another thing about Stevens' story, as we are in a dual timeline and he's reflecting on his past, is the need we have as humans to reflect on our past, to make sense of our stories. And this is something that Stevens is very resistant to doing at times. He finds himself reflecting, but then when he becomes aware he's reflecting or going through memories, he seems to judge himself for it a few times in the book, thinking that this is like a frivolous thing to do, that it's not going to bring any value. It doesn't do any good to reflect on these things now. But I think it's a human thing, and it's something that we are inclined to do, especially as we get older. So even though this was a part of Stephen's humanity he couldn't quite appreciate, it's something that I did and that I took away from me with the story. And lastly, I'll just say that Ishiguro's prose is beautiful while at the same time humorous. I found several moments that made me laugh in the story, while at the same time the story was very melancholy and emotional. And I loved it because, again, like Stoner, it got me to reflect on so many important questions and make me think about my own life and things I might be thinking about someday as I get older. So I think that these two books, Stoner and Remains of the Day, should be talked about side by side because of these questions that they evoke. And I hope that if you read one, you'll read the other and appreciate them as much as I did. Please let me know in the comment section below if you've read either book, and I would also love to hear your thoughts on any of the topics I brought up in this video, what you think it means to lead a meaningful life, what you think greatness means. I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.